Hello and welcome to CNN Talk. If you are joining us from on Facebook, very busy couple of hours today. We're commemorating D-Day. Usual face, we've got Liam, Aisha, as well as Ian. And the question we're asking you is, D-Day remembered? Can its allies still rely on the US under Trump? Do send us your comments. We'll read them out in the show. And tell us where you are writing from. Liam, I want to start with you. Can they still rely on President Trump, given the fact that he has some disdain, I think it's fair to say, for the likes of the UN, for NATO, has criticised Europe?
Lots of points there. The first thing is that America isn't just President Trump, who will be at most a two-term president, probably will be a two-term president. But the ties that bind us go much deeper than that, not just, obviously, the UK and the US, and we've got the state visit here, but Europe and the US as well. You know, the amount of people of German, Swedish, Italian, Spanish origin living in the US. These are very strong binds. I'd also say we're commemorating D-Day, June 1944, the biggest seaborne offensive in the history of warfare. Back then, America's goal was to be the global leader, the global hegemon, if you like. That goal has changed now. Trump does want to be more insular, more America first. I do think America's still got this enormous global role, but it's conditional now. If Europe wants America to be its defensive shield, Europe must pay. You know, continental European economies need to be spending more than half or 1% of their GDP on defence.
That's a fair point from him. Aisha, can he be trusted, though, do you think, when it comes to this idea of cooperation, multilateralism?
No, I don't think he can be trusted. And I think he's proved himself to be quite an unreliable kind of partner, if you look at the Iran deal, for example. But I want to make a sort of a broader point. I mean, the D-Day anniversary celebrations, and we are very nostalgic, and rightly so, about the Second World War. And we have to think about what came out of the Second World War. And that was a new sort of geopolitical order, which was about cooperation and people coming together. And I'm afraid Donald Trump's kind of style of politics, which is very much isolationist, is sort of threatening that, in my opinion. OK,
Leanne, we'll get your take. Top of the show, you can lead the opening of the show. How about that?
The deal. The art of the deal.
The art of the deal.
He has no choice.
Big opening for the show.
Oh, dear.
Big opening. Stand by.
It is midday. You're joining us for CNN Talk, coming to you live outside Buckingham Palace. And today is about remembrance. Remembrance for those who were there and those who weren't, and the lessons that should be learned for global leaders.
US President Donald Trump will join other world leaders on the coast of southern England to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
It will be another reminder of Western unity, which has been emphasised repeatedly during his state visit to the UK.
Prime Minister May, it's been a true honour.
I've always believed that cooperation and compromise are the basis of strong alliances.
But you do have critics, and you always do when it comes to Donald Trump, saying, listen, what's the trade deal negotiated with Donald Trump worth?
Mexico shouldn't allow millions of people to try and enter our country. We're going to put tariffs on.
Our presidents do best overseas when they try to lead positively, and the president spent a lot of time today criticizing the European Union.
What kind of message, though, does this send to the allies?
The president suggested that I sued the European Union, which we didn't do. We went into negotiations and we came out with a good deal.
I would have sued and settled, maybe, but you never know.
It's self-defeating for the United States president to act this way.
So the question for today is, D-Day remembered. Can its allies still rely on the US under Trump? Do send us your comments. If you're watching us on Facebook, send them to us on Facebook and tell us where you're writing from. If you have any questions for our panellists, we know Liam Halligan, Aisha Hazarika and Ian Dell joining us now. I'm going to get some of the comments first. Daniel Lambros, definitely not. He's about isolationist policies that are already causing instability worldwide. Donnie, Donald Trump isn't America's voice for war and defending allies. Congress is. Very good point. David Williams, Trump thinks he can maintain American influence by getting American allies to pay for it. And one more. Jacqueline, with this flip-flop president? No. Ian, can he be trusted?
I'm going to push back on the question a bit, which is my role on this programme.
It is, absolutely.
D-Day remembered is the important bit of the question that you're asking. I think on a day like today, or day like tomorrow, possibly more importantly, it is quite divisive to sort of talk about core political disagreements. I mean, of course, everyone has their views on Donald Trump and his reliability, but America, I think we should remember, over the past century, has come to the rescue of Europe twice. If America hadn't intervened in the First World War or the Second World War, it is highly probable that we would be sitting here speaking German. And I think we have to remember that overall today, rather than maybe indulge in a sort of session of attacking Donald Trump.
It's not so much of attacking Donald Trump. It's the importance of having these institutions and these alliances in place. The important multilateralism, important of cooperation, which is something that we have heard from the Queen, something that we've heard from the King. Go ahead, go ahead.
Just very briefly. I said yesterday, nothing is forever. Donald Trump's presidency will come to an end in 18 months or 5.5 years' time. The alliance between this country and America has outlived all presidents, and it will outlive Donald Trump.
So, I mean, I'm quite surprised at my colleague's supplicancy in terms of his deferential. Tugging the forelock to the great overlord, Donald Trump. I suppose this is a metaphor for a post-Brexit world, isn't it? Where basically...
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Go ahead.
It has felt like he's been in charge of things for the last sort of 3 days, and I think Ian has just confirmed that. How dare we question the great man? How dare we question the special relationship?
I didn't say that at
we
all.
are, we are known for being rambunctious and sort of, questioning, and that is British. That is the best of British me. Exactly. So I do think this is a really important day. And actually, I was listening this morning to sort of a senior political intelligence committee sort of person who is a conservative, who is not somebody who's railing against Donald Trump. And he did make the point that what came out of the Second World War, and remember, we glorify and lionize the Second World War, but there was a huge amount of death and destruction and a lot of bad stuff. War is not a great thing. A lot of people died and lost their lives in the war. But he was saying what came out of it was a new world order, which was about multilateralism, working together, trying to prevent these sorts of things happening again. And it's sort of largely been successful, particularly kind of in Europe. So one of the things that Donald Trump does threaten, as your first contributor made the point, was, he's pursuing much more of an isolationist policy. He's beginning to pull at the threads that have held us all together, whether it's the UN, whether it's sort of NATO. So I think, I'm sure Ian is right, and I hope he's right about these alliances holding. But I think these things build up over time, and they're quite hard fought for, and they can be destroyed at the stroke of a pen, and they can be kind of pulled down quite quickly. And I think these alliances, you have to nurture them, you have to tend to them, you have to treat your allies as your friends, not like you're the boss of them.
And we'll talk about this alliance in a minute. I want to go to Phil Black, who joins us from Portsmouth. And Phil, we're expecting to hear from President Trump. What has he had to say?
Hello, Issa. Yes, so President Trump took part in this ceremony a short time ago, reading a prayer that was initially read by then US President Franklin Roosevelt around the time of the D-Day operation. And so that's how these world leaders are playing into this ceremony as it's unfolding here behind me. The ceremony itself is telling a story from the start of the war, the fall of Europe to Nazi Germany, to the departure of the D-Day landing forces. We're hearing musical performances and there's some dance involved as well. And then there are also these spoken testimonials, things like correspondence, letters, prayers, official accounts from the time of events as they unfolded, formed into this narrative, if you like. And it's interesting in tone. They say they're going for poignant and uplifting, which means, on one hand, for example, you hear the letter of a young French resistance fighter who was executed, and then on the other hand, this big band, military band, broke into a really rousing rendition of Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. So these two sides, this rich tapestry, if you like, of the feeling, which is all here to commemorate the event. It's extraordinary significance, really, in terms of turning the tide of the war and ultimately leading or contributing to the Allied victory in a really significant way. And we're honouring those who took part in it. That's why there are so many veterans here. They're very much the focus of what took place here. These men in their 90s at least who took part in the storming of the beaches, who jumped from the aircraft, who provided the support and so forth. And then on top of that, this other theme that we've been talking about today, which is how this all came about through an extraordinary act of international cooperation. The 14 countries involved in the planning and the execution of this massive military operation that went on to have such significant historical impact.
And like you said, quite rightly, the importance of memory, the importance of mass memory, isn't it? Phil Black there for us in Portsmouth. Thanks very much, Phil. And we have heard, like you said, Phil Black say from President Trump. Here's a little soundbite from what he had to say.
As we mark this solemn anniversary of D-Day, we remember that the defense of our nations does not begin on the battlefield, but within the heart of every patriot. Today, let us renew our pledge, engraved at the American Cemetery in Normandy and inscribed by President Dwight Eisenhower in St. Paul's Cathedral, right here in London, that the cause for which they died shall live.
Now, I want to get some more of your comments in before I go to a panel. Angela, USA can't rely on him, don't think allies will do any better. Actir, allied countries have their own messes. Heidi, we would like to keep on relying on the US, but not on President Trump. And I just want to show our panel, if I may, this graphic, Vicky, if you can bring up, of some of the organizations that Trump has actually pulled out of and quit. This is, of course, our panelists will know. The UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, as well as Paris Climate Change. These are some of the deals and organizations he's actually quit. Trust me, it is coming, so bear with us. There it is. Promised you would, and it's by magic has appeared. Can he be trusted then? I know you're going back. It's about, you know, he will leave. It will be about the United States rather than about this president. But we have seen where he stands on the Paris climate change. We know where he stands on the likes of the Iran nuclear deal. How do you, when we're looking at a global Britain, if you think this is going to be a global Britain post-Brexit, how is that relationship going to work?
Well, the relationship is very special, of course. It outlives Donald Trump, who will be at most a two-term president by the US Constitution, as Ian said. The ties that bind the US to the UK, for instance, I mean, there are American men and women buried in cemeteries all around this country. There's a huge American cemetery up near Cambridge where I live. And also, you know, D-Day wasn't just about American and British troops, there are Canadian troops, other troops from countries that came to be called the Commonwealth, New Zealand. And war is awful, obviously, and there are young men and women today in their 80s and 90s who remember the horrors, who
many of them will be dead today,
who witnessed them firsthand and were part of them. And had that not happened, Nazism would have won. So it was a necessary evil. But back then, America was by far the biggest economy in the world. It was the emerging superpower. It doesn't want to be the global hegemon to the same extent anymore. It hasn't got the cash to do so. And in that sense, the protective shield that America's put over Europe through NATO, it's NATO which has generated peace in Europe since the Second World War, in my view, not so much the European Union, that will now come at a cost. And the cost is that when America's spending 4% of GDP on its defence, the likes of the French and the Germans are not going to get away with spending far, far less as they do. And Trump's calling that out. And his approach is often brash. I didn't want him to pull out the Paris Climate Change Convention. But, for instance, I do agree with him that the trading relationship between China and the West was not working. China was making massive intellectual property transgressions and breaking the rules, not allowing access to its market the way certainly this country, and to a lesser extent America, has allowed China access to its market. So not defending his style and some of his language, which I find offensive, as I'm sure many people do, on some of these issues of pushing against the global consensus, he does have a point.
But on NATO, he said time and time again that NATO was obsolete. I think we have little clips of him saying that, and we'll get some of the thoughts from our panel. If we can play that, Vicky.
Number one, NATO is obsolete. And number two, the people aren't paying their way.
It's obsolete, and we pay too much money.
NATO We're going to have the people that aren't paying, they're going to start paying. It's obsolete. We're getting ripped in NATO. They don't pay their bills. They are delinquent. NATO is obsolete and has to be rejiggered.
Kind of awkward, he's going to be there at Portsmouth, he's going to see so many allies. I know, Ian, you want to go on?
Look, every single one of those clips there was from before he became president. That's what he was saying on the campaign
Works
trail.
very well with
I don't
base.
remember him saying that since he's become president. No, he's clearly not a great fan of NATO in some ways, and he's not a great fan of the fact that many NATO members are not paying their way. And he is, let's admit it, he's right on that.
He is right
Britain
on that,
is spending 2% of its GDP. It's no good going,
I
A
love
level
the way-
playing
I
field.
love the way that if any
this
other
is money that
politician,
could go into
if
schools and
anyone
hospitals.
else says, oh yeah, because you guys are really into public spending. So basically, like you're basically saying that if somebody says something, they're not allowed to be held to account. If someone like Jeremy Corbyn,
I haven't said that. Why do you keep saying things that I haven't said?
You said that. Oh, he just said that on the campaign trail,
which is a fact. He did.
Exactly. So that's clearly what he believes. And since he has become president,
he hasn't said it since he's become president. Well, if they had, presumably CNN would have found the clip and put it on there if he'd said it since.
He's tried to drive a coach and horses through NATO, and it backfired spectacularly because people were like,
reverse.
"No, it
Quite the
absolutely
reverse.
didn't."
What he's done is made all these countries pay more money.
The great irony is he is going to be there with all these veterans who put their life on the line,
including
and
US
this guy is a draft dodger. That is the massive irony about all of this. We had Bonnie Greer here, who was in tears thinking about the price that her family
Bill
had
Clinton
sort of paid
did the same
in
thing in
terms of, like-
1994.
Yeah, but
he was a draft dodger.
He doesn't go out there and basically, Bill Clinton was like, we're going to pull down sort of NATO. This guy is not
so that's
to be.
all right.
This guy
Donald
is
Trump
not
was a
to be
draft dodger, so you
trusted.
criticise him. But Bill Clinton, the god that is Bill Clinton, cannot be criticised.
He's not giving it the big one about NATO.
He was
Bill
giving it a lot of
Clinton-
big ones, wasn't
well,
he?
he was not. Well, Donald Trump, are you kidding me? Do you really want to go there? What did he say? He would grab women by that nice. I think
They have something in common.
That's a bit of an own goal for you, my friend.
What NATO is in the mind of European politicians and a lot of European people, of course, is an unconditional guarantee that if European allies are attacked, America will intervene and come to its rescue.
And all the other countries.
I think what Trump was saying before he became president was that unconditional nature is no longer there unless money is remitted, unless countries that are spending a lot less on defence than the US and the UK, by the way, pay their way. And to some extent, I think it's worked. He hasn't said it since he's been the president, because if you say it when you're actually the commander-in-chief, it has real...
He had a
hold on, let me finish.
on NATO.
It has real military implications, so that's why he hasn't said it. But look, the important thing is that here we are in the UK, and we have the leader of our biggest ally. This really is a very successful relationship between Britain and the US over the years, and an awful lot of people today, including members of all our families, I'm sure, who were involved with the Second World War, will be, they'll be thinking about people who they've loved and who didn't come back.
Graham's saying Trump does not understand friendship, because in this way, some of you are pointing out, there is such a transactional kind of president. He doesn't value these this friendship, these alliances. Do you think that's true, that he doesn't value friendship? He doesn't see it in that way?
No, I don't. I think he understands the power of rhetoric, and I think a lot of it won't get much coverage on the mainstream media. But the fact that he's here, and in stark contrast to previous American presidents, he's saying, look, if the UK leaves the European Union, there is a very strong chance that we want to do a trade deal with the UK. And that's a really important message for the UK. This is our biggest single country trading partner by a very long way. This is a fifth of our trade, and a UK-US trade pact, have no doubt about it, would send a message around the world that we are moving back towards free trade.
But one does not replace the other with you. We'll talk about it on the break.
And also, what's really interesting is what he said is he wants to get his little hands on our NHS, which is the very, very,
We'll go to break. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion, and we'll continue the discussion, of course, on Facebook. Do keep sending your comments to us here on CNN. And I'm glad you brought it up. But you had some very fiery comments, a tweet, I think, from you on Aisha, on his visit. I can expect nothing less, really. But
thanks.
How do you How do you rate the last 3 days? How do you see it? Who's won? Who's come out winning out of this?
There's one big winner in town, and that is our new overlord, Mr. Donald Trump. He has absolutely won this slam dunk. He looks like this visit has elevated him. He is now, you know, it's actually felt weirdly like that since he's been here, someone has been in charge. Because remember, we have had nobody been in charge of this country for such a long time. He has been in charge. He has dominated every single news cycle on every single TV show. He has pronounced on what should happen with big bits of domestic policy. He's, you know, done a little game, who he likes, who he doesn't like, in terms of anointing the future Prime Minister. And of course, this NHS thing is, I think, is a very, very big signal. And to me, it's kind of quite a prophetic and quite a scary glimpse into the fact that if we do leave the EU, we will not be freeing ourselves from one set of masters. We will be enslaving ourselves to one overlord, which is going to be Donald Trump.
And I know you disagree, Ian, because you said
I love annoying all the right people.
Go
It
ahead.
just proves that
Well, I
I'm in
think
the right
you
zone.
just said that deliberately just to trigger me, and you succeeded.
Basically.
Ian's triggered.
Yeah, he's triggered.
Snowflake, snowflake.
Let's talk about this after the break. Let's talk about this after the break, because I know you've got very strong views.
Let's do that.
Let's do that.
do that.
And breathe.
Welcome back to CNN Talk. You're coming to you live from outside Buckingham Palace. And we are asking you today, D-Day remembered, can its allies still rely on the US under Trump? And during our Facebook break, during the break, we were talking about what this state visit by Donald Trump, by President Trump, has actually achieved. Aisha, just remind our viewers what you were saying and who won out of this.
So I basically felt that Donald Trump won. It elevated him to look like he's basically in charge of us now, because we haven't had any leadership in this country. He's making pronouncements on domestic policy. He's saying who he likes and who he doesn't like to be the future leader. I think it reduced us as a country. It made us look supplicant, begging, and we are so desperate we would do anything for a trade deal. And he's already said, and the ambassador has said, the NHS, which is the jewel in the crown of our society, would be on the table.
Are we poodles? Are we Americans poodle?
Utterly ridiculous, as if we're going to be... you used the word enslaved in the Facebook session. I mean, as if the fifth largest economy in the world, a country with the traditions of Britain, is going to be enslaved to anybody. Look at our history, and I think you'll find the reality of that, Aisha.
Well, I think we'll find that we will be. We've already... Our NHS is something that's so important.
It's so
and
great
that
that
is
it's been
going
copied
to
the
be...
world over,
That is going to be on the table. That is going to be on the
viewers, the NHS,
That doesn't mean
the
it's
National Health
safe
Service.
from
Health
the
Service,
Americans.
the cardinal principle of the National Health Service, created after the Second World War,
by a Labour government.
just after D-Day, the great post-war, you know, the British people chucked out Churchill, the great war leader, and brought in Clem Attlee, Labour's visionary, more socialist prime minister, to build a new Jerusalem, to build institutions like the National Health Service. It has the cardinal principle, Issa, of course, which is free at the point of use, unlike in the States and some other countries. No one in British politics who's serious or mainstream or is going to win an election is ever going to challenge free at the point of use.
And we've seen that.
And doing a trade deal with the US absolutely won't change that. And I'm afraid it's alarmist.
It's not.
It's alarmist to say that it would. And this happens every election cycle. Oh, the NHS is going to go away. You must vote a certain way. And it just scares.
So that is factually wrong. That is actually factually wrong. So if there,
remember 24 hours to save the NHS.
If there was a trade deal, services would be part of that.
Yes.
And health services make up a huge part of that thing. So as part of the procurement law, American companies, and this would be part of the trade deal, American companies would have a right to bid for those contracts. And if they didn't feel that they were getting a fair crack of the whip, they could sue. Yesterday in the press conference, or Monday with the press conference with Theresa May and Donald Trump, he made a joke about how he would have sued, in terms of that's his style of things. There are lawyers who are experts in this already sort of saying that in terms of big pharmaceuticals, we already have some American health provision in our system, particularly with mental health.
All over the world.
That's been a new thing, and that has gone really, really badly. So people, not just on the left, but actually people on the right, are very, very worried about this.
When you do a trade agreement, it's a quid pro quo. You negotiate, both sides have to come out of it feeling that they've got something that is better than what they had before. If Britain doesn't want to put health services into a trade agreement, it won't do so.
Oh, yeah,
it's as simple as that.
It's just like how we've been negotiating with the EU. It's so easy to do that. If we don't want to do something we just don't do it.
For the fourth time, you're putting words into my mouth, which I didn't say.
I said that. I said we. You're just so paranoid today, honestly.
We haven't heard from the likes of Boris Johnson. We haven't heard from Michael Gove. We haven't heard from Jeremy Hunt on this.
The NHS is the biggest employer in Europe, right? It employs 1.1 million people directly.
It's bigger than the Indian Army.
It's a massive operation, and there's already huge involvement by overseas firms from America and everywhere, providing services, providing pharmaceutical procurement, providing healthcare. Just because America might get involved more, the idea that we're then going to suddenly have an American healthcare system when we haven't a history of that and no one wants that and no party wants that, it scares people.
But, you know,
Let me finish. It scares people if you keep saying the NHS is going to be removed. Older people will get worried and get upset. No one is going to change free at the point of use in this country.
People are very worried about the situation, and my colleagues will always say this: if anybody raises anything in terms of a potential fact about what might happen after Brexit,
You haven't given a
it's
fact.
called Project Fear. I have actually in
No, you
terms of
haven't.
services, but I think there's another important point that Liam does make, and this is about immigration. So our NHS is really built off the back of immigrants,
Very
people
true.
like my father who came over here. And one of the things that Donald Trump has been so vicious in his rhetoric about is immigration. And that has caused a lot of division, not just in America, but all across the world. And one of the things I think is really important, think of the genesis of what we are marking today. I was in Amsterdam recently at the Anne Frank Museum. And one of the really moving, poignant bits at the end, and these are people of all religions, all faiths, all colours, saying, what is incredibly important to remember the lessons of the Second World War and things like the Holocaust and Anne Frank. This stuff did not happen overnight. The Nazis did not suddenly just build out-switched overnight. That happened through years and years and years. What it begins with is words, in terms of how you demonise people, in terms of how you dehumanise groups of people, how you create the othering of groups of people. And that is something which I'm afraid Donald Trump has absolutely been part of, and I think that's why we have to be
Donald Trump's a Nazi.
we have to be very well. He certainly supports white supremacy, and I think one of the things you have to be very, very alive to as we celebrate this is the genesis of where this came from. Your words matter. Hate speech matters. And I hope that Donald Trump, as we're all reflecting, and I hope as he sits there, Ian, he will reflect on that as well.
Let me just give me 1 second, Ian. I won't forget. I'll come back to you. Hassan, as Kurds, he says, we have always been loyal allies of America. But the truth is that America sometimes gives up its allies easily. It's a very good point he's making here.
Well, can I, in the final 2 minutes, actually go back to talk about D-Day and what we're actually remembering here? 25 years ago today, I was in Normandy with my father, an American friend and his father, and a couple of other relatives. And we visited all of these cemeteries, and you had a very moving graphic earlier on.
We did.
A drone going over one of the
We can show that
cemeteries.
image again, actually, Vicky, if you can
And
bring that
that
up.
really brought all those memories back. It was one of the most evocative weeks of my life. I'll always remember it. And I remember, and I can feel myself filling up now, but I can remember saying to my dad, we're going to go to a German cemetery, and thinking that he would refuse to go because he was very anti-German. He grew up during the war, and you can imagine. And we walked around that cemetery, and he was in tears. Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, this is... Aisha says Graham is so sensible, but going back to our question, can its allies still rely on the US under Trump? The reason we're asking this question, and I know you had doubts about the question here right at the beginning, it's the fact that Trump has turned his back on so many of the alliances on cooperation that really has really protected Europe and protected in NATO insofar.
He hasn't turned his back on NATO. He has turned his back on UNESCO. He's turned his back on the UN Human Rights Council. And I agree with him on all of those. Not the climate change one, on the first two, I completely agree with him. How can you have any respect for a UN Human Rights Council that has Saudi Arabia chairing it, for goodness sake?
I mean, he does love
It
Saudi
comes back to economics. On a lot of definitions, America is no longer the biggest economy in the world. America's got very low unemployment, but it's got an awful lot of people living on pretty low incomes. There will always be this huge link between America and Britain that political leaders will in the end reflect, because that's what their people want because of the ties that bind them. But in the case of modern America, where it's got to it feels it has to spend more time and money looking after its own vulnerable people, that support will not be as unconditional as it was during and after the Second World War.
I'll leave you with two comments from Heidi. Do not leave the EU and become a slave to Trump. And Larry, no one can rely on Trump except Trump. That does it for us. Thanks very much for watching CNN Talk. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. you.